Hey guys, this is Ruckus Gaming with the second to last installment of the Relic tier list. Today is going to be the shop relics. I did decide to keep them separate from the event relics, just because of how differently you may consider making choices about which one of them to take. I think the event relics and shop relics kind of have a different set of logic to figuring out if it's worth taking or not. With the merchant relics, I think a lot of times you may ask, well, if I'm going to be spending about 150-ish gold, is there anything else that I could be spending that on instead that might be better? That could be 2 uncommon cards, that could be a rare card, it could be another relic. It's about the same price as a common relic, and I think the common relic pool is pretty strong overall. So that may be one thing that I will take into account when making these tier list rankings. Just the opportunity cost. This could be, in the neighborhood of 2 removes. Maybe you want removes more than you want the particular relic that the shop happens to be offering. But without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. Alright, first relic we're going to talk about is Cauldron. When you buy this relic, it gives you 5 randomly brewed potions. I'm going to put this, very unfortunately, into the D tier. I think there are times when you might want this, especially if you have potion belt and lots of open slots. That's kind of a no-brainer. When you look at potions, they average maybe around 75 gold, depending on what rarity they are. So spending 150 to get 5 is more like, 2 or 5 potions for the price of 2, which is not bad. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to get that much actual value because you're probably not going to have 4 to 5 potion slots open, and if you do, that means your potion chance is probably pretty high, so you're also more likely to be getting a potion for free out of your next combat or 2 pretty soon. So it does allow you to see lots of potions and allows you to choose the best potion for your current situation. But that being said, unless you have a couple factors very specifically working in your favor, you're probably not going to actually get use out of all 5 of those potions. So you can't really think of it like, a 5 for the price of 2. You're still probably only going to get maybe 1 or 2 potions out of it, especially if you're playing on a higher ascension level. Next up is Chemical X. This increased the effectiveness of X cost cards by +2. So for instance, even if you have 0 energy and you play a whirlwind, it will still play as if you had 2 energy. I'm putting this into the C tier, and I want to look a little bit more closely at that one, just to explain why. I'm not going to go through this with all of the relics, but I think this does a good job of demonstrating why I only value it as C. I do prefer relics that are widely applicable to all characters. You see, obviously, Ironclad only has the 1, though it is a very quality card. He literally only has 1 card that works with this relic. So if that is not a central piece of your deck, then Chemical X is not going to do a lot for you. Silent has a pretty good mix. These are all quality cards that you could take on any given run. Skewer maybe a little less so, but you always like to see Malaise, and Doppelganger is definitely not bad. Defect is easily the best set here. These are all very quality cards, and Watcher maybe in the bottom half quality-wise, as well as the colorless card Transmutation. I can't say I've gotten a lot of value out of this card yet, but that may be my own shortcoming. So the quality of the cards that you get to use with Chemical X is varied at best. They are not always, you know, must-have kind of cards to a deck. So it's just not often that this is going to provide high value. But when it does, it feels amazing. When you get that Ironclad Whirlwind Strength deck going, and you see a Chemical X, it's a very exciting feeling, I must admit. Next up is Clockwork Souvenir, which gives you 1 buff of Artifact, which blocks an incoming debuff. I'm throwing that into A tier. It's one of those relics that is not sexy. It doesn't do anything amazing, but the actual mechanical benefit that it grants can be quite substantial. Perhaps you may be playing Defect and you have Biased Cog in the deck, or you want to block a enemy from giving you a vulnerable debuff, which will increase the damage you take quite dramatically. It means you have to block for less. You can attack more, you can end fights more quickly. It is incredibly useful on any character for any deck, and is just really nice to have. Again, maybe not a win or a run winning relic, but it does provide a very, very strong mechanical benefit, even if it doesn't seem exciting. I think I slept on this for quite a while as a newer player, and once I saw some other people use it, some very good videos out there of, you know, streamers playing with Bias Cog in particular. I like watching those types of videos where you can just not worry about the biggest drawback to a card and only receive the benefit. I mean, it's going to get overpowered and silly just by nature of breaking how that card is balanced. Alright, next up is Dalis Mirror, which simply lets you duplicate a card you already have in the deck. I'll throw that in the B tier. I think it's great in that it can provide any kind of benefit that you want to have in your deck, by nature of it being something you're already using and can hopefully get more use out of with an additional copy, though that's not always true. For example, you don't need 2 barricades or 2 corruptions in the same deck. Of course, 1 is enough, but generally speaking, 2 of a great card is even better than 1 of a great card. So can be great to see if you have a high quality card that you can get a lot of good use out of. Sometimes you see it in the shop when you are pretty early on in a run, you know, mid-act 1, so you don't have a lot going, and you're like, well, there's nothing to really use this on, and you just lose that opportunity. It's kind of a brick, because you don't want to spend that much money to duplicate an uncommon attack or something like that. You really want to use this on a high-quality rare. But when you have that rare and you see this, it's a pretty good thing. And obviously any kind of deck has cards that they want to have more of. It's just whether or not the timing lines up with how your deck comes together. Next up is Frozen Eye. This lets the draw pile be put into actual drawing order, and I will throw that right into S tier. It reduces all RNG from the game. You know exactly what will be drawn when, so you can plan your turns accordingly. You can decide based on what you have in your hand now, any draw you may have, and knowing that you will get, you know, the 5 card draw, or perhaps, you know, 7 if you have a couple different relics like Snecko or Bag of Prep, what have you. You maybe even be able to plan out several turns ahead, especially if you can lean on your knowledge of the enemy and their attack patterns, or just look it up on a wiki or with a mod like Bestiary. Actually just super overpowered because you just know exactly what you will get. You don't waste any lost energy, you know, playing a card, you know, like Prepared, or, you know, that's not going to cost energy, but, you know, you try to use acrobatics to draw into something that you might find really useful. You need a big block card, but you don't get a big block card, and then that means you just lost 1 energy drawing with acrobatics for nothing that you could have better spent just blocking with something you already had in hand. So it even affects the energy and how efficient you are with that, which I think is an underrated and aspect of it that doesn't get mentioned enough. Next up is Hand Drill. This relic, when you break an enemy's block, will grant 2 stacks of vulnerable. And I'm putting this also into D tier. I think it is only very, very situational. There aren't that many enemies that add block. Some of the hardest enemies do, for example, Shield and a Spear. I believe that 2 out of 3 Act 3 bosses use block to some degree. At least 2 out of 3 Act 2 bosses use block. Some of the harder fights that you see in hallway fights may add a little bit of block, but it just doesn't ever seem to be worth the amount of gold for me. I think sometimes I'd much rather have another relic offered in the shop, or a card. This could be 2, maybe even 3 potions or something like that. So just never high enough on my priority list. Usually if I benefit from vulnerable, if I'm going with a very heavy attack strength style deck, I'll probably already have some vulnerable in it, at least, hopefully. But just never something I've seen a great need for and the opportunity where it would be good enough to take. Next up is the Waffle. This gives you +7 max HP as well as fully heals you. I'm putting this right in the middle of B tier. I think there are those moments where it's absolutely amazing when you are on life support, single digit HP, and you see this in the shop and you feel like you get a new lease on life. It is a great moment. But if you're not really hurting for HP and you see this in the shop, it's kind of a brick. Maybe you buy it for the 7 HP, but then you're really saying, 150 gold for 7 HP. You probably have better uses for that gold, honestly, even if it's just removing. Max HP is not the #1 most important thing for winning a run. That's why there's events like Apparitions, which you can trade up to half of your HP. It's just not the most important factor when it comes to winning. So often when you're looking at decisions that involve max HP, you should think that the value of it is not a high value. So it's not a big bonus to your max HP. It's not a big penalty to lose 7 HP. But the condition and context of how much HP are you already missing at the moment you see it. If you can heal, almost your full health bar, of course it's worth it. But if you've got, 10 missing health, you get, 17 with the full heal. Maybe if there's nothing else good at the shop, but very, very hit or miss. Next up, we have Medical Kit, which will allow you to play unplayable status cards, mainly thinking of wounds. I'm putting this in A tier. Maybe a little biased because I like Ironclad, and Ironclad has great exhaust synergies built into most of his decks. But you can also get great use out of this on all of the other characters. Wounds are super nasty and can be especially nasty to smaller decks that they will fill up even more quickly. If you have a 15 to 20 card deck, even 3 to 6 wounds from Book of Stabbing can be really, really dangerous. Or, you know, the wounds that you get in the Taskmaster fight from the middle Taskmaster slaver, those can add up really quickly. And getting a lot of statuses in your hand, slowing your draw down, slowing the ability for you to play useful cards on turns that they need to be played is really, really crippling, and getting them out of your hand is a great thing to do. Next up is membership card. This gives you, I believe, 50% off. Yes, 50% off of all products in the shops. I'm placing that right up at S tier behind Frozen Eye. This is great if you can get it early to midway through the Spire. Obviously, the later you see it, the less value it may hold, though it may still allow you perhaps to get a late, you know, Act 3 or even Act 4 shop where you can just spend all of your gold at that last moment before you go into the last couple fights. If you've got it, you're always excited to be pathing for more shops. You're looking for other relics which could help gain you more gold, even things that are usually not thought of as super valuable. Something like a golden fish might be even better with this. Small bank might be even better with this. Golden idol might be even better with this. So always super fun. Everyone likes going to shops and spending money. Next up, we have orange pellets. If you play 1 power, 1 skill, and 1 attack in a turn, it will remove all debuffs from you. That is S tier for sure. When I learned about doing this with Bias Cog, it blew my mind. You can do it for things like removing the energy down debuff from fasting on the Watcher. You can use this to get rid of the Snecko Confused debuff. You can use it to get rid of Constrict, and of course, just the normal weakened, vulnerable, frail. Being vulnerable is so dangerous, it makes you need to block for 50% more. Not being vulnerable will save you so much HP. Not being weakened will make fights end so much faster, and mean that you have fewer chances for bad luck to influence what happens. So always excited to see this, and particularly excited if I've got one of those risky cards with a high reward, because once you remove the drawback from something like Bias Cog and it becomes just a positive, it is incredibly powerful. Next up is Ovary, which will allow you to look at 5 separate card rewards, of course, of which you may allow up to 5 selections. I'm throwing that in B tier. I think that this can be really good sometimes. It helps you fish for cards. It can interact with other relics such as Question card and offer you a 4th card to choose from in each of the 5 picks. If there is a specific card that you really need to find to really finish as that last piece of the puzzle for your deck, this can speed that up because of the way cards are seated and how they're chosen. The more card rewards you see, the better the chance that you'll find the card you're looking for just a little bit further down the line. So it can be worth going for in certain situations where you're really just trying to get as many card rewards as possible to help you find something. But that's not something that's always true. Usually you're being a little bit more picky, and you don't need to spend your money on this. There's usually other things that you may want more. You don't have to spend 150 gold to choose 5 if you can just buy it from the shop or get it for free later. Next up is Prismatic Shard, which makes it possible to choose from cards of any color from a post-combat card reward. That's going to be C tier. It's such a meme. The best times for this, I think, are either very early in a run, like your very first shop, when you haven't really made anything yet, and you can just YOLO for fun and try to see if you get lucky and build something silly and overpowered. It can definitely happen. I would also say it can be takeable late when you already have a deck pretty much put together. You're not desperately searching for anything in particular to make it work, but you've got money to spend and you might get lucky with something kind of weird from some other character's card pool. The biggest drawback is that if you're halfway into a deck, you're making a ironclad exhaust deck. He's already got roughly a third of his cards that exhaust and work great for him. Obviously, there are cards that exhaust for other characters, but not nearly as many by proportion. So by adding their entire card pools, but with very few actual cards that may interact interestingly with your deck, the overall chance of you seeing something that may actually work for your deck is, on average, going to be lower than if you were just looking within your own character's card pool. That's how I understand this relic. So, can be fun for the memes, but for win rate, it's not the best choice. I think if you take Prismatic Shard, you're already just kind of saying, well, like, whatever, man, let's see what happens. I don't think you would throw away a strong or promising midway Act 2 run to buy Prismatic Shard and then never find the last 25% of your deck to make it actually function. Next up is Sling of Courage, which grants you 2 bonus strength at the beginning of elite combats. I'm putting that in high B tier. I think it's always nice to get relics that guarantee you will get benefit from your relics during your hardest challenges, being the elites and boss fights. That being said, it doesn't provide an immediate boost usually, or it only provides a sporadic boost. You know, your next fight might be an elite fight, but then, you know, it doesn't continue to add value in the regular hallway fights. I think it depends on the deck you are running, but I would say that most decks do benefit from strength, so generally can be takeable. But again, often does just kind of come down to whether or not there are other things in the shop that you feel like you may spend your money more effectively on, even if it's just a remove. So generally good, but not something that is always something you're excited to see. It's kind of like, oh yeah, that'll be good, but not something like Orange Pellets or membership card where you're like, yeah, baby, now we're talking. It's just a nice bonus, not crazy bonus. Next up is Strange Spoon. This gives exhaust cards a 50% chance to not be exhausted when played or something like Ethereal takes effect. I'm placing that in A tier. I think that this is a generally great thing. I think that exhaust cards are quite powerful because they are meant to be played once per combat, and the chance to get multiple uses out of them is generally going to be quite powerful. Obviously, like I said, some cards don't get benefit out of being played twice, like Corruption, but that's a power, it doesn't exhaust. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. Most of the cards that exhaust will give you more benefit the more you play them. So the chance of that not exhausting and giving you a second use, a second feed, a second exhume, a second malaise, you know, what have you. Getting a second use out of any of those cards is going to be always useful and beneficial for your deck and just make it stronger. Great relic, I think. And it's just kind of fun because of the flip of the coin involved. Sometimes it'll let you down, but sometimes it'll be a real winner for you. Next up is the Abacus, giving you block every time you shuffle your deck. I think this is very B tier. Bottom B tier. Obviously, this benefits from smaller, potentially infinite decks. It can be a great block plan for the heart if you're going with a, 5-card Watcher infinite deck or something like that. But the larger your deck gets, the less value you get out of it. 6 block is alright, it's like Orichalcum, but, having to play 30 cards or having to draw 30 cards just to get use out of Orichalcum is not great. Sometimes I think it's useful to think of relics, does another relic do something similar, or does another card do something similar? Abacus is essentially the same as, how many turns does it take you to cycle your deck to get 1 Orichalcum? The higher that number is, the less useful this will be. Next up is the Toolbox, which gives you the ability to add 1 of 3 colorless cards to your hand at the beginning of combat. Beginning of your hand? Yes. 1 of 3 random colorless cards added to your hand. I'm throwing that in C tier. This is basically, like a much worse Nilari's Codex. Instead of every turn, it's just the first turn, and it's only colorless cards, which are quite varied in quality, let's just say. It can give you something that is really great, but there's no guarantee that you're gonna get it again later. Every combat is just a very big roll of the dice whether or not you're going to get something that's useful or not. It could even be a curse in your hand. So, not something I usually take. Alright, next I'm going to do the character exclusive shop relics. First up is Ironclad's Brimstone, which gives you 2 strength and your enemy 1 strength at the beginning of each turn. I want to throw this right at the bottom of C tier. I think if you see this in Shop 1 and you can build around it from the very beginning, and you can hard go for something like Whirlwind or Twin Strike or Sword Boomerang, get some strength continuously, and just slam with big AoE attacks, it can be great. But the scaling that it provides your enemies is very troublesome, especially because many of the toughest fights of Act 2 and 3, including, of course, your end goal, the heart, it will be brutal. Just more than you can really deal with if you don't have the chance to build around it from the get-go. This is not a good late pick into a deck. Alright, next up we have Twisted Funnel, the silent exclusive shop relic. It grants 4 poison at the beginning of each combat to all enemies. I think of this basically as a backstab. It's 10 damage over 4 turns to 1 enemy. So obviously really good over time in AoE multi-enemy fights, but you also don't necessarily want all of those guys sticking around for 4 full turns anyway, so you're not getting the full value of it in that way either. I put this in the bottom of C tier. I just don't think it's a lot of damage unless you really hard into a poison deck and just full go poison, and then it's just more of like a win more relic. It's nice, it gets you kick started so you can use that catalyst a little sooner or something like that, but you probably have a lot more central core pieces to your deck that you need to see first before you take this. I don't think you really take this and then say, oh yeah, now I'm going poison. Next up is the defect exclusive shop relic, the Runic capacitor. Just gives you 3 more gives you 3 more orb slots. Putting this at the bottom of A tier. I think this is a great exclusive relic for the defect. It does make orbs a little harder to evoke, especially if you haven't been super careful about how you rotate them. If you've got a bunch of lightning orbs all stacked up before your frost orb, may be hard to get that frost orb to evoke for the block on the turn you need it. So something to be a little wary of, but in general, adding more orbs is one of the best ways to win as the defect, because it just is a great form of scaling. Add a little focus on top, and you're great. You can think of this as getting something like Capacitor Plus for free every turn. It's an uncommon. You might be able to get that from a shop, but you're probably not going to find it upgraded. So you can even say that, uncommon cards are, let's say, average 75 gold. So perhaps worth the upgrade. Maybe that makes up the rest of the difference for the cost. You say, yeah, that's a worth the upgraded capacitor. I'd pay 150 for an upgraded capacitor. So I think that's a great relic. And last is the Watcher exclusive Melange. Every time you shuffle your deck, you scry. And that is probably the worst of the shop relics, to be honest. It's not even as good as Foresight, which is not even a good Watcher power. So I think when you compare it to something that you can get from a card every turn instead of just when you shuffle, there's no reason that if you wanted the scry that badly that you wouldn't just already have it through some other means. So you'd already have a third eye, you'd already have cut through fate, you'd already have foresight, things of that nature, and this is not going to add a lot of value on top of already having those. And having this doesn't necessarily mean you're also going to be taking a lot of scry cards in the future either. It's nice if you've got a medium-sized deck. Maybe you haven't gotten all your removes out yet, so you're seeing a lot of strikes and defends and the scries and getting them out. While it's relatively quick to cycle, but not quite so small that you're infinite yet, it can get you feeling like you're close to going infinite, though it may be a little bit of a false feeling. Eventually you're just not going to get the draw to get the energy you need because you've still got 14 to 15 cards operating in this deck. The scry will get it out a little faster, but not fast enough. Alright, so that is the shop relic tier list. I can't say that I feel super strongly about a lot of these relics. I think obviously the really high tier S relics are great, and a couple of the others you just don't often take enough to feel like you have a great grasp. Sometimes maybe you miss opportunities when they may be good to take them because you just haven't seen it in the right opportunities enough to know it's a good opportunity. There is only one of these per shop, so there's a very limited number of opportunities to see shop relics as opposed to just like seeing lots of common relics in a run. And you often see many common relics and you're quite familiar with how they work and when they work and why they're good. Not always is true with shop relics, so very open to hearing what you guys have to say. I'm sure you guys can let me know if I've gotten something completely wrong. Just drop a comment. Always glad to read those. Share, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And tune in for more Tuesday tips and tricks with Ruckus Gaming. See ya on Saturdays for the fun runs, and have a great night. Great day, whatever it is where you are.